Okay, so today we're going to talk about the characteristics and needs of living things. I posted for you some answer keys. I want to go over this one first uh, on the chart that you were supposed to do. So you're supposed to take the terms at the top of the chart and you're supposed to put them in the proper categories. Either they were characteristics, the things an organism has or can do by itself, and a need, a thing that an organism must get from their environment. Okay, so the first characteristic I'd like to talk about is cellular organization. If you're alive, if you're a living thing, you have cells, or even if they're not living cells, like a table, for instance, that's made of wood, isn't necessarily alive anymore because it doesn't do the other things that a living thing did. But when it was alive, those cells were functioning, and the cell is the basic unit of all living things. And so we often define an organism by how many cells it has. Uh, Many things are unicellular organisms. They are simply one-celled organisms that are living. And matter of fact, there are more unicellular organisms on the planet than there are multicellular. It's just that you don't see them because a single-celled organism is very small. So you can't see with your eye. You need things like a microscope to see that. So, for instance, bacteria are unicellular single-celled organisms. And matter of fact, one of the things I like to tell students is that there are more bacteria alive in your mouth right now than people that live on the planet. And that's a pretty amazing thing to think about. And that's how small bacteria are. And, you can brush your teeth and all those things, but they'll come back after a couple hours. They live in your gut, right? In your intestines. They actually, a species of E. coli actually lives there. All E. coli is not bad, but a species lives there that will help you take some of your food and help process and make vitamin B for you. So they're beneficial. Matter of fact, it's a whole area of science called studying the gut biome, the biome of your stomach and your intestines, that is gaining a lot of notoriety in recent years. That they're learning that they have a lot to do with your overall health, the kinds of bacteria that you have living inside of you. So if you're not a unicellular organism, you are a multicellular organism. That means you are many-celled. So let me ask a question, and you're going to have to chime in here. Are we unicellular or multicellular? Humans, uni or multi?
Multi.
Multicellular, thank you. Okay, just making sure you're there. That's good. All right. So one of the other characteristics of living things here is you see it says respond to stimuli. So oftentimes we call that movement, and respond to stimuli really is a better idea of what living things do, because when we think of movement, we think of humans. We think of, hey, I'm moving, or we think of running or jumping or walking, and everything doesn't do that. For instance, a plant does not walk or run or do any of those things, but it does respond. And when it responds, it does move. For instance, if you go outside in different environments, you may even have trees like this at your property. If you have a lot of trees, there are the high canopy trees, right, that get all the sun that they need. And then there are these lower canopy trees. And oftentimes these lower canopy trees will kind of bend and try to find their way to the spaces around these high canopy trees. And so what they're doing, they're bending, their stems are bending toward the light. You may even have plants in your house that are near windows, and you can see that they'll be bending towards the windows or towards the light. The roots of a plant is another great example, because roots respond by growing down. And the reason they're growing down is not because they can try to sense water, but they're growing down because they sense the gravity. Okay, so they respond to the gravitational force. So living things do that. They all respond in some way. So when there's a response, there has to be a stimulus. So in the examples we talked about, gravity is a stimulus, light is a stimulus, sound is a stimulus. Right now you are processing information as I'm talking to you. Okay, and if there was a loud noise, bang, something like that, you might jump, you might get scared, you might turn your head to see what's going on. Right? I think Miss Caltrone just jumped in the office next to me. And the dog did. I scared Pear before too. She now needs some attention here. So anyway, the stimulus and response, right? When you're at school and the bell rings, what do? Well, you get up and you go to class. So the bell is the stimulus, and the response is what you do. Okay. All living things reproduce. I don't know a living thing that does not do that, right? If they didn't, the species of that organism would cease to exist. Um, there is a difference in the way that things do reproduce, though. Some things reproduce sexually, and that's the way you're most familiar with. You've heard of sex, and pretty much that just means that there's two parents involved in creating an offspring, right? So your mom and dad, husband and wife, male and female, they are required to create new humans. And the same thing for dogs and cats and a lot of our pets, fish as well. But most of your single-celled organisms, your unicellular ones like bacteria, they can reproduce by themselves. They simply copy their genetic information and they make two new cells. Even cells in your own body will reproduce asexually. Your own cells inside you as an organism won't reproduce asexually, but your cells will reproduce. That's how we grow, right? So if you have one skin cell, you go through a process and boom, you have two skin cells. That's a form of reproduction. Okay? And believe it or not, some multicellular organisms can also reproduce asexually, things like a sponge. And nowadays it's hard to find remnants of living sponges because the ones that we buy in the supermarket to wash our dishes with are manufactured. They're made of a plant material called cellulose and even sometimes some plasticky materials. And they don't really have, I haven't seen a real sponge in a while. You have to go to specialty bath shops. But real sponges are the remnants of an animal that lives in the water, like SpongeBob, and that organism reproduces asexually. Little tiny pieces of it pop off, and those pieces grow and develop into brand new sponges. The thing that's unique about asexual reproduction is that the offspring is identical to the parent. And that makes sense because there's no mixing of genetic information during asexual reproduction. But for sexual reproduction, the offspring are different, right? You are all different than your parents. You're all different from your brothers and sisters because your parents' genetic information combines in different combinations to make different offspring. The only type of offspring that would have identical genetic information would be twins, identical twins, right? And that's because early on in the process of fertilization, right, the egg gets fertilized, okay, and eventually, early in the mother's womb, that egg kind of, as it starts to divide, and you get a group of cells, the group of cells kind of split off, and now you've got two kind of blobs of cells, and they both grow, and they both have the same genetic information because it happened after fertilization, and so you get two new organisms. Okay. Growth. Every living thing grows. It gets bigger. Cells get bigger. Um, we add new cells if you're a multicellular organism, and that's one of the things living things do. And what goes along with that is also development, right? But they're not the same thing, so it's important to think about the difference. And the way I like to do this is try to think of yourself as a young baby. Imagine your little baby face from pictures you've seen, and try to put that face on your current body, right? It doesn't work because you change from that person. You didn't just grow and get bigger. You're not just a giant baby now, but you also developed. You develop different characteristics. Uh, you know, it, you're different. Okay. I'm different. I used to have more hair, right? I'm developing. So we develop throughout our entire lives, even when we stop growing. One of the most important things to understand is that every living thing carries out complex chemical activities. Respiration is one of the important ones you'll need to know about for making energy. We take in oxygen, right? And right now I'm breathing in oxygen, and so are you, and you're breathing out carbon dioxide every couple of seconds. And that shows you that you're making energy because you're taking the oxygen you're taking in and you're transforming it in your body in your cells making that energy, and then the culmination of all those cells making the energy, they release carbon dioxide, and that travels through your blood to your lungs, and you're exhaling it. So, and the other part of that is you had to eat food at some point, right? So the food you ate, along with the oxygen you're breathing, is making this energy that you need for all the activities of your body. Not just making energy, but other things as well. The energy is needed not just to move, but also to grow, to develop, all the things you're doing. Some of the other activities that we do, the chemical activities, digestion, we break down food. Excretion, we get rid of waste. And it's not just urinating or having a bowel movement and releasing feces, but it's also this release of carbon dioxide that's happening right now. This is an excretory process. Okay. When we talk about all of these things as a whole, we say the word metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all the chemical activities in an organism. Okay, so think of metabolism like a very general term. If I said to you, hey, what'd you eat today? Or what'd you eat yesterday? And you said food, I'd be kind of annoyed at you because obviously you ate food. We want to know something a little more specific, right? Sometimes friends joke with each other, they give each other like general words and general terms. Well, that's exactly what metabolism is. A very general term. There are thousands of activities going on in your body. And the most common ones that we want you to know about this year: respiration, digestion, and excretion. Okay. The last characteristic everything has, everything has a lifespan. Every living thing, unfortunately, will die, right? And maybe not unfortunately, because that allows new organisms to then take their place and have their life experiences. Okay. So things can't live in and of themselves just with their own characteristics. They need to acquire things from the environment. And one of the major things they need to have is they need to have living space. We did a graph recently where we talked about carrying capacity, where the sunfish went up, and the graph went up, and then it kind of did one of these. Sorry, I'm looking at my my video, and it looks backwards to me. So anyway, the graph goes up, and then it kind of did this. It kind of went up and down, right? And we said that line through the middle was the carrying capacity. And the reason it went up and down is because there were more predators at some point, there were less predators, there was more food available, there was less food available. And so it causes this oscillation of the population of a certain organism. And all organisms have that. They have this carrying capacity. Well, that demonstrates the fact that everything needs living space. Everything needs to have enough space to have shelter and the habitat in which they live. And in their habitat, they're going to get the things like food, water, nutrients. They're going to be able to find a mate. They're going to be able to compete successfully with other organisms like themselves and other organisms that are in their niches or their role in the environment. Okay? And if you can't do that, you can't live, right? So, we can't just keep packing people in a school or in a house. We eventually get to a point where there's just not enough space for us to function properly, right? It's another way to think of it. Everything needs water. Water is the most important inorganic compound on the planet for living things. And it's inorganic because it does not contain carbon. No carbon here. Okay? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen are the important elements in organic compounds. And this doesn't have carbon, so it's not considered organic. And things that have carbon are organic. And sometimes in space shows like Star Trek, I always remember from watching as a kid, they would always talk about, oh, these are organic life forms or carbon-based life forms. It just means that they have carbon in it and they're organic. Right? We talk about organic eating. You're eating natural things that have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and no other preservatives, no other chemicals have been added to them for that. Okay, and most of your body is made of water. It shows you how important water is. And that's being a solvent. Solvents dissolve substances. And this is where we carry out most of these complex chemical activities that we're talking about, right? So like think about digestion, all that water that comes into your stomach in the form of acid, all the blood through your body that helps carry things is a lot of water. Excretion, when you get rid of waste, you have to have a certain amount of water to be able to do that. So water is very, very important for living things. Food. Food is not the same for all organisms, but you must get some kind of nutrients. And I don't use the word eat because eat means like you have a mouth and you're chewing and you're swallowing, and things don't do that. For instance, back to those sponges for a minute, they're filter feeders. They simply let the water flow into their body. They absorb the nutrients that are in the water, the microscopic nutrients, and they use that as their food, and they let the water out. There's no mouth in a sponge. There's pores, little holes. Okay? Two very, very important terms you'll need to know this year, autotrophs and heterotrophs. The word auto means by itself, like an automobile. The suffix troph means food. So organisms that are autotrophs make their own food. Hetero means other, and troph means food. So organisms that eat other things are heterotrophs, right? So a heterotroph eats other autotrophs, like plant-based organisms, or you eat other heterotrophs if you eat meat of any sorts or any animal product. You're eating another heterotroph, right? So autotrophs make their own food. So plants, and one of the most common ways that organisms make their own food is through photosynthesis, taking in sunlight, taking in carbon dioxide, taking in water, and making food with that. And that's something we'll talk more about. Okay? The last important thing that you must do with your environment is maintain stable internal conditions. And the word for that is this word right here, that's homeostasis. And you have to maintain things the same as an organism. You don't think about these things, but it's true. For example, body temperature. Your body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Always, all the time. If it goes up a degree or two, you have a fever. If it goes down a couple of degrees and stays there, you have hypothermia. So these are indications that things are not okay with your body. And one of the main reasons for this importance of maintaining homeostasis, and especially internal conditions like temperature, is because these complex chemical reactions need these specific temperatures to happen. For instance, one of the major things that your body does is make proteins. Your organs, your muscles, the structures within your body all incorporate a lot of proteins. And so proteins are very temperature specific. And if you start to change the temperature, these proteins will unwind and they'll break down. And that's one of the reasons why when you can heat your food and things melt and things cook, what you're doing is you're changing the protein composition. You're changing the molecular structure, the atoms and the molecules of those proteins. Okay, but metabolism must stay the same, right? If people have problems with their metabolism, uh, they have thyroid conditions and things like that that have metabolic problems. They can become overweight. They can become underweight. Your heartbeat needs to maintain a constant level. If it doesn't, you can develop high blood pressure. You can develop an inflammatory heart, which means an enlarged heart. Okay. And so maintaining stable internal conditions is extremely important, right? Blood pressure is another example, right? If you go to the doctor, think of the things they check. They check your heart rate, they check your breathing, they check your blood pressure, they check your eyes to make sure that your nervous system is responding correctly in the way that it's supposed to, that you're in homeostasis. And so two ways that organisms maintain their temperature is they're either cold-blooded or warm-blooded. And this is really, really an important distinction between different types of animals because it really changes the way they live. For instance, warm-blooded animals like ourselves, we maintain internal temperatures with our metabolism, right? So, that's why when you get a lot of people in a crowded room, the room gets hot because everyone's giving off body heat. because we're constantly trying to maintain that 98.6. Okay? Cold-blooded organisms, on the other hand, don't go to the temperature of their environment. They still need to maintain internal conditions constant, but they'll use the environment to control that. For instance, reptiles. If anyone has a lizard or a snake, or you've seen them in a zoo or in their environments, they are constantly moving to things like hot rocks or laying in the sun in the morning to warm their bodies. If you have one as a pet, you have to have a heated rock in your tank so that when the reptile is cold, it can go to that rock. And as the reptile sits on that rock, when it senses that its body temperature is starting to overheat, it simply moves away from the rock. And so organisms that are cold-blooded, they are at the whim of the environment to make sure that they can keep their conditions constant. You might say that sounds like a drag that you have to constantly move around, versus a warm-blooded organism can pretty much go anywhere because we control our own, within reason, right? Because we control our own temperature. Well, the advantage of a cold-blooded organism is that you don't have to eat that much. When you feed a reptile or a snake, you feed them maybe once a day, sometimes once every 2 weeks, depending on the organism that it is. But they can go a long time without eating, which is a huge advantage if you're out in the environment. If you're an organism that doesn't have supermarkets to go to pick up food whenever you need it. Warm-blooded organisms, on the other hand, birds, humans, we're eating constantly. We're eating all the time, right? 2-3 times a day, and some of us eat other meals in between. So this is a quick overview of the characteristics and needs of living things. I'm just going to quickly go and show you the graphic organizer. I want to show you that I added a lot of boxes in the one that I gave you to do is very, very simple. And pretty much you were supposed to, living things, life, right? Living things have characteristics and living things have needs. And you were supposed to, again, take the words from the bottom of the sheet and put them here. And so you should have had water, living space, uses energy, maintaining homeostasis. And then the characteristics coming off here: perform complex chemical activities, reproduce, made of similar chemicals. Okay, is another one we kind of added here. Responding to the environment, grow and develop, and cellular organization, and performing complex chemical activities. And so this is not that complicated if you simply follow the arrows off of it. So again, we talked about reproduction, producing offspring. We said that there was asexual one parent, sexual two parents. So this is just a way to organize all the information. I suggest that you add these things to yours so that you will gain practice and understanding by writing it rather than just trying to review mine. Okay, obviously I'm not going to be checking that, but I think it would be a good practice to add these information and check yours and add the other information to that. For instance, we added made of similar chemicals, and we talked about some of those chemicals, which we'll get into. But the major chemicals, lipids, which are fats and oils, and they're fats and oils, proteins, nucleic acids, and carbohydrates, right? We've heard of proteins and carbohydrates and fats. And then the one that we're not that familiar with yet is nucleic acids. And the important thing about that is that they are the genetic code for all living things. And so they will code how to make those proteins we were talking about. Okay? And when we respond to the environment, we talk about stimulus and response as an example of that, right? So I'm not going to go through this whole sheet with you, but I think you should at the least review it. Review things like proteins are the building blocks, or that amino acids make up proteins, and they're the building blocks. There are 9 essential, 11 non-essential. Essential you get from the environment. You need to get, and non-essential, your body can make those. Okay? And how do you get those? The things you eat, right? That's why if you're a vegetarian, you have to be careful that you don't always eat one source of protein, because that one source of protein may not have all of the essential amino acids in it. And so you have to eat a different variety of foods to make sure that your body's getting all of the essential amino acids. so that your body can make all the proteins it needs to make. Okay? I will point out one more thing, a specialized protein called an enzyme. And enzymes are really important for those chemical reactions we were talking about. Okay? Um, so anyway, that's a quick overview of the characteristics and needs of living things. Definitely go through this. Definitely go through and add information that you don't have on your sheets. And that's it. I'm going to stop this recording and see if anyone has any questions.